Yeah, you can take it to the bank.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, sports fans, children of all ages, we are back here on Take It to the Bank podcast. This week, I have got the hottest man in bass fishing. I'm not talking about looks. I mean, maybe I am. He's a nice looking dude. But the dude, this guy is straight catching their ass all over the country. Doesn't matter what he's fishing in. Rocket ship all the way to the top, straight off of a top 5 finish at MLF Redcrest. Let's bring in Mr. Jake Lawrence, the Tennessee River Hammer himself.
I sure appreciate you having me here, and I would definitely concur. I like my fishing abilities way more than my looks. I think it's gotten me a little further in life so far.
It has. We were just talking really quickly off the air. Your camera was already in use, and I asked you if you were starting an OnlyFans. And I feel like you can catch a bass better than you can make money on OnlyFans.
Absolutely.
Well, dude, thanks a ton for joining us. Let's talk about Redcrest just a second. That was just last week, and pretty doggone good derb, dude. Like one of the cooler things, in my opinion, the coolest thing about that format is when it gets down to the wire and, two guys are duking it out and both of them's catching fish on, either right there at the top or around the cut line. And that knockout day, you caught one with like 3 minutes to go, was one of the more clutch fish catches I've ever seen that put you in the championship round.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I've caught thousands of 2-pounders, as I'm sure we all most have, and that one, out of all the rest of them, will stand out to me quite possibly for the rest of my life. Obviously, we didn't win, but to qualify me for that championship round, I had a ton of family, ton of support and friends, and a lot of people that have traveled a long, long way. And I was by no means giving up, but I was already kind of having to accept, like, if I don't get a bite in the next few minutes, like, we're going to have a great time visiting with the family and kind of catching up. And it was just a special moment, I guess. And boy, I sound terrible when I say this, but heck, I guess I should have asked for like a 6 or 7, 8-pounder, because I asked for a 2-pounder, made one more crank of my reel handle, and an exact 2-pounder eats it. So it was kind of a neat, special moment. And honestly, pulling out of that area, of course, our format, we're not in a hurry. Once the third period's over, we just kind of take our time, and we certainly get back, but we don't have to push our equipment like we normally would. And that ride back, I had a pretty, 20, 30-minute ride to kind of reflect on the day. And it was one of those things, like, I got that eerie feeling of like, boy, I have no idea where I'm going to start, what I'm going to do tomorrow. I felt like I'd kind of burned up what I had to get there. But I just had that special feeling of something might really be happening here. Like, things like that don't happen for no reason. And I had a number of things that happened earlier in the day, all throughout that knockout round, that, like, if that one little thing doesn't happen, if this one little thing, so many things have to come together in every fish format. It's really special when everything kind of comes together and goes your way. I've been on the flip side of this, I guess, once now, missing the cut there at Harris Chain, and both Harris Chain and Murray, I had a fish on in the last 13 seconds of the event. I think Murray, it was 13 seconds left. Harris, it was 8 seconds left, and got neither one of them in. And I know that doesn't sound like a whole lot. Like, you've got all day, you've got a ton of fish catches in between, but like, each one of those fish would have made me a lot more money. So it was kind of cool for see the flip side of that and have things kind of actually go your direction. So it was a really fun event, and have to give it up to to DC there on pulling out. What an incredible back-to-back wins with Redcrest, and 3 total. There's only a handful of guys that have won a championship 3 times, so really special. And certainly, I'm not sure how old Dustin is, but he's right around my age. Like, we're still early in our careers. Him a little further than I am, but he's not been doing this all that long, so it's kind of scary where he's going to head himself.
For sure. I was texting with Dan Quinn, guy there at Rapala, when he had got to his first place on championship day, and, had just started stomping them. And, I told Dan, I'm like, it's almost un-American at Guntersville, the best bass fishing lake in all of the country, as far as numbers of fish of largemouth bass, that he's about to win it on smallmouth and spots.
I'll tell you, a good friend of mine and another, Redcrest qualifier had a great event. Jacob Walker actually called that Gosh, it had to be like August or September of last year. And I just blew it off. Like, man, there's just, of course, we can work together.
Yeah, of course.
I say work together. We can't get very specific with locations, but saying that it's going to be one at the dam is one of those. That's not any specific place. And I just kind of blew it off. I'm like, man, there's no way. It's Guntersville. But I tell you, it lined up exactly the way that it needed to with really the majority of Guntersville, the lake portion of Guntersville. They were all spawning, and it made it kind of fickle as far as getting numbers of bites and pulling into an area and just being able to generate a lot of bites in a short amount of time. And obviously up there, I still have not had a ton of time to really reflect on and watch a lot of his, but I saw the highlights and, I don't think in any way, shape, or form those fish were spawning, whether they were pre or post spawn. That was the deal, was to find a group of fish that was not spawning that week and you could catch. They're in a biting mood. All those that we were fishing for were more of a defensive, bite as opposed to an eating or feeding bite. So he definitely got ahead of the curve and ahead of most of the field. Wesley was up that way as well, but he even, I think in one of the highlight videos, mentioned that some of those smallmouth were spawning up there. So he may not have fully been doing that, but definitely, in this day and age, we're also good. We all understand fish behavior and what they should do. That it really takes, oftentimes in this format, finding something special, getting ahead of your competition in terms of fish location and kind of the general patterns. If you can find something that a bunch of fish are doing that nobody else has, you've got a huge leg up on the field.
It blew my mind, talking about that he was catching, those first two periods, especially there on the final day, he had his graph turned off. He was not in his power period or whatever y'all call it. And he caught a lot of fish on a Mena without looking at it. Like that blows my mind the way things are now.
Yeah. No, I tell you, it's the Minnow has definitely become a forward facing, bait. Like one goes with the other, PB&J type deal, but it's by no means a bait that you can't fish from the bank or in a pond or anywhere, even much like what he was doing there. I have caught several, back when I was guiding a lot, I would have someone running the trolling motor and live scoping and I would just kind of pitch it around and man, I caught a bunch of really, really solid bags on Pickwick and, other places. I have a tournament partner, Monty McWilliams with Mallard Estates that will throw that thing all day long out of the back of the boat. And it's unbelievable because he's going to weigh a couple in and he's not even looking at them. I'm like, man, do you realize like I'm among the most efficient and kind of have a very good understanding of this. And you are still able to weigh a couple bass in almost every event. And he has no idea where the bottom is or how deep it even is. So the Minnow is definitely more versatile than what we're giving it credit for. It's just a bait that you really have to be dialed in as to where the fish are, meaning in the water column. That Minnow, you got to keep it above them. And it's more of a bait that I need to know where they are. It's not something you're going to cover a tremendous amount of water with, but it is very, very effective in all depths and water columns and whether you're looking at it or not. It's just, you have to be a little more patient, without scope to really be successful with it. But very, very good bait. It's something that's obviously kind of taken over, but I still feel strongly that like if forward facing had never, come into play here, we would all still be throwing a Minnow. We wouldn't we wouldn't catch near as many on it, but it would all be part of our arsenal. It's just one of those baits, kind of like the old rubber worm, like back when the old school ribbon tails came out, and you could throw that thing anywhere and they would bite it. It's kind of one of those deals. It's pretty fun and special to kind of be on the front end of that thing and spend a ton of time with it the last couple of years and understand just how versatile it is. I've caught them in some pretty wild places with it. So I'm just kind of waiting for the right moment, the right place in one of these big events to kind of blow that side of the Minnow out.
It's one of those things that, fish get accustomed to stuff. The A-rig was absolutely amazing when it first came out. Still a great bait, but it's not something, in my opinion, that now is an all year round. They eat the blades off of it every time you throw it, like it was the very first time it came out. The chatterbait being the same way. Like first time a fish saw a chatterbait, you catch everyone on the lake with it. But they've gotten used to it. They've never gotten used to a Senko because they can't.
Right.
It's
You
too
can't-
natural.
it's exactly.
It's too natural. It's too erratic. They've never gotten used to a drop shot with a robo worm on it. You can always catch because it looks too natural. They will never get used to a minnow because there's nothing else out there that looks exactly like what they eat every single day that mimics it
Correct.
any better than a jighead minnow. There's not. I don't give a damn what you're talking about. That's it.
You're right, and that's kind of the look at it however you would like. You're exactly right. Now I have seen a small downturn in my catch ratio or my bite ratio. Like when I was among the first doing that for 2.5 years, like you pretty well caught every one of them. Like it was pretty insane. Now that they've seen it, you do one wrong thing with it, and he's not going to bite. But
For sure.
It's one of those that you're still going to generate more bites most of the time with that bait over anything else. Like it's really filled a lot of gaps for me and a lot of the decision making of whether it's a jerk bait or a soft, like a D-shad, that sort of thing. Really, man, that minnow is like, you can pretty well bank on there at least a percentage of them is going to bite it. So there's some little small things that you can do with it, whether it's downsizing the minnow, adding, making it heavier, moving it faster, slower, bigger. There's all sorts of different directions you can go with it, but there's almost always a minnow that they're going to bite. And it's going to be here to stay. Like it's going to be here for a while. There's always, how it is, every 4 or 5 years seems like there's a new technique or a new shape or a new bait, something like that. But I think this is one that at least in the last 15 or 20 years, like I feel like this one's going to stick more so than a lot of others. Well, much like you said with the A-Rig, like that was unbelievable when it came out, but it's just too gaudy. It's too flashy, too much going on. They're going to
work
up
in every situation all the time.
Exactly. This is something you could throw it 12 months out of the year. Now, obviously, the dirtier the water is, the smaller their strike zone shrinks. They're still going to bite it if they know it's there, but you kind of have to be more precise with it. So again, there are times when I don't have one on the front deck by any means, but it's something that I've always got in the boat, and it'll be hard pressed to get it out of my boat for a long time.
Well, that brings us a pretty good segue. So you just got off of, again, that top 5 finish at Redcrest, Tennessee River Lake. Know you'd spent some time down there pre-practicing, and we're here in the month of April, and we're going to talk about what these fish do in the month of April. Now, I'm fairly familiar with the Tennessee River. I'm not good on it by any means, and I'm definitely no Jake Lawrence, Drew Gill, or maybe even Jacob Walker, if we want to talk about him that good. But, to me, April is a big time month of transition. Now,
absolutely,
this year's been really crazy with, the flooding and all the weather and it being so warm early, but so cold, in March. And, it's kind of been a goofy weather year, as, probably 8 out of 10 are. They're just never the same. But from the beginning of April to the end of April, to me, it's a big, huge difference because you're catching fish pre-spawn on April the 1st. And a lot of times you can catch fish on ledges on April the 30th.
Like, exactly right. It's a very diverse month. Lots of things can play, and the only constant in April is change. Like you can bet your bottom dollar, whatever you've got going, it's going to last 3 days. Like you just kind of have to go into the month of April knowing that it's constantly changing. And, a lot of that has to do with our water conditions outside of even a kind of crazy spring like we've had, even minute changes when they want to get up there shallow and kind of push up, at least on the TVA, Kentucky Lake specifically, they are very sensitive to very minute changes. An inch or two up or down can really change their whole mood and kind of where they're going to set up and what they want to do.
If a guy's traveling to a Tennessee River, doesn't know a lot about it, or hell, if you've known, if you've been here all your life and still trying to learn about it, if you have got one condition that changes, that makes the biggest effect on fish this month, what is that one condition?
I'm going to have to say falling water. That is the most consistent. You can bank on it every single time. And look, I don't even mean, like what we're fixing to deal with over the next few days, where, the lake is somewhere 360 and change, maybe up to 361 at this point, several feet above summer pool. And then it's going to crest and start its downward cycle once we can get the Ohio and Mississippi kind of under control. That is certainly going to change what those fish are doing. But I'm even talking 357.5. So a foot and a half, 2 feet below summer pool, and them dropping it back down to 356, which happens very often here in both March and April. So they've really gotten a little more stringent on allowing our water levels to come up. Like when I was a kid, it seemed like they would always start about second week of April, somewhere in there. And
Yep.
Maybe I'm wrong. Somebody can call me out on this. I certainly don't know for certain, but it just seems like now they're waiting more towards like the 1st of May. They'll get it up there 358.5, 3, almost summer, but it's not quite enough water for those fish to be in the bushes and really have a lot of shallow water opportunities as far as cover and places for them to spawn and hide. So it's they're a little more gun shy, completely understandable after the 2010 and 11 floods, for good reason. But it doesn't matter whether it's a super high lake or even below summer pool. When they turn that water around and start sucking it out, you can bank on a lot of change happening. Now, as far as what that change is, just kind of depends on where they've been and how fast or slow the drawdown is.
Right.
Multitude of factors that are involved in exactly which direction they're going and what they're doing, but you can bank on they're going to do something different.
This podcast will be coming out on April the 15th, so we're going to be dead in the middle of the month. Let's talk about where you start. We'll use Kentucky Lake just since that's your home lake, but Guntersville's got grass. Pickwick's very, very similar. Most of these lakes are very similar completely throughout the chain. So let's talk about where you start from the beginning of April and kind of work your way through the month.
Yeah, so on the Tennessee River, really more specifically like Kentucky Lake, is as well as Pickwick. I would kind of put those two, in the kind of the same world. They act very differently, but at this particular time of the year, they are very similar in the sense that I don't really want to target spawners if I can. If I can get away with pre or post spawners, regardless of whether that's April 1st or April 3rd, I want to try to stay away from the ones that are spawning. We were all kind of stuck again, back at Redcrest last week at Guntersville. Anybody that was fishing south of wherever Wesley was, very, very close to the Nickajack Dam, you were fishing around spawners. Now, you caught some post spawners, you caught some pre spawners, but the majority was definitely spawning. And those fish are just generally trickier to get to bite. Especially the bigger females, the males are oftentimes guarding and they're a little more defensive. But as far as the big ones, they're really kind of fickle and it's harder to be consistent on them. Like you can have a day that they seem to bite, whether you figure out a specific bait or they're just set up in the right way that particular day. But for it to be consistent, I really like to target the pre and post spawners. And again, this time of year, a lot of those are going to set up on kind of the same general places. It's not uncommon at all to catch those on the same, little area that you find some fish, catch two pre-spawners and a post-spawner or vice versa, however it works out. But I really want to start on these lead-in banks. So if, one thing in bass fishing that's fairly black and white and how I really, regardless of the time of the year, how I break down a fishery, whether it's a place that I've been to all the time, quite frequently, or a brand new body of water, what I'm having to do at virtually every event this year on the BPT tour, is I want to find where the largest spawning ground is, wherever in the area that I'm looking at that particular time, where are they going to spawn? And the reason that I do that is to me, the most consistent, the most black and white that a bass is going to act. And what I mean by that is they need roughly three things. They need hard bottom, They need protection from whether it be wind or current, and they need, sunlight. They need sun penetration to get these eggs and kind of do whatever it is that all that happens. So it's very easy to find those areas. Once you've seen kind of the breakdown and what they like to get on, regardless of the body of water, like each, like Highland Reservoir, they're going to spawn in different areas than a lowland natural lake or even a river system. So it can be different from lake to lake, but they all need those three things. And so if you can find that, I don't care if it's January or August, I know for a period of time on this body of water, this is where a population of fish is going to live. And I can just kind of backtrack or zoom forward, jump forward a couple months to the post-spawn period. And it just gives me an area that I know they stopped at one particular time, and I can kind of branch out from there. But I want to find these spawning areas.
It lets you, especially when you're looking for the biggest area of that, then you're fishing for the biggest population of fish.
Biggest population. And it just kind of, to me, it helps to hone in and kind of, you take a body of water that's maybe 60, 70, 80,000 acres. When I'm talking about the spawn, you might only be talking about 10,000 acres of this body of water. Now, Again, we are now, but I'm not always king on the spawn, but it just helps me to knock out a tremendous amount of water. And from there, I can, again, based on the time of the year and the weather conditions, I know there should be more pre-spawners. So let's go look on the more steeper banks, kind of the lead-in stuff. If it's post-spawners, I'm going to look for some isolated piece of cover, a boat dock or grass or some offshore, piece of structure out there that they can kind of run to and heal up. But it just helps me to take out a tremendous amount of the water and backtrack or zoom forward, to help me do that. And again, the reason that I choose the spawn, regardless of the time of the year, is because it's the most consistent throughout any region or body of water. They all kind of need those three things, and it's pretty quick and easy to find based on, which body of water you're on. So again, going back to the month of April, I'm going to find those areas. For instance, if you look at Standing Rock Creek there, just the bay just north of the Stewart County there, this is a great spawning, it's got a lot of spawning habitat. You're not going to really see it on this map per se, but the banks are primarily gravel. And from about where your cursor is to the back of the bay are gravel banks. Now, there are little sections there that it gets big rock and various things, but it's a ton of gravel here. They've got a lot of hard bottom. They've got protection from both the current and the wind. So this is a more east-west facing bay, and our predominant winds in the spring are generally from the south or even, on our cold fronts, it's a north wind. Either way, it's not going to be 3-footers rolling on this. So
right.
You've got good protection. One quick place that I always want to see is right there by Graveyard Hollow. You'll see that steeper bank leading into that little main lake or main creek pocket there. So I love these little pockets off of major creeks. They're very protected, even inside of a protected pocket. They've oftentimes, at least on the TVA, they've got hard gravel or hard bottom of some sort all the way across the pocket. But you'll see these little, what I call lead-in banks. I don't want to call them pre-spawn or staging. They are staging banks, but they're not just for pre-spawners. They'll, post-spawners will do the same thing. But you'll notice the earlier in the month of April, generally going to lean more towards the steeper banks, which is, if you look on your map, it's where the contour lines are the closest together. So right where your cursor is.
A spot like this, a spot like that. If it's a little bit later on in the month, back in here.
Correct. I've seen these fish in really cold temperatures in late March, early April, be all the way towards the back, but they'll be on the last steep bank, So when the water conditions or the water temperatures are below 55, I have a pretty strong inkling that bass aren't very comfortable getting in vast shallow flats. They want to be somewhere they
back
can
here,
pull
something
up
like
really
back here
shallow.
in the back.
Exactly. I want to stay away from that. That's at least not going to be my first couple stops. That's not where I'm anticipating them to be. With all of this being said, I hope that everyone can keep an open mind, because it's really, a process of listening to the fish and getting the small clues that you can, receive from each bite. In that particular bay, there's a multitude of different kind of lead-in banks. Again, the earlier in the year, the colder the water temperatures are, the more that I'm going to lean or at least start on these steeper banks. And the reason for that is they can slide vertically up and down these banks. If it's a warming trend and the top 3 or 4 feet of the water column is warm, or the warmest water temperature, they're going to slide up there and sit in even a foot or 2 feet of water. Whereas tomorrow or the next day, we have a major cold front come through. The top 3 or 4 feet of the water column is usually, sometimes going to be the coolest. And so with these vertical or steeper banks, it's very easy for them to swim up and down in a very short amount of space and be comfortable. Whereas if they slide all the way to the back of Standing Rock in that shallow flat on a warming trend, the first cold front, they've got to swim several hundred yards to get back out there to some comfortable water. So I do I do use that as a general rule of thumb. Again, more in the, call it the first half of April. Usually by mid-April or late April, we're starting to get the water temperatures up there in the mid, even up to mid 60s, just kind of depending on how the spring is developing. So at that point, I'll start looking more towards those flatter places. Or again, it's more of I'm anticipating them to be on the flatter places. I'm going to be very open-minded in April. That is the absolute key. If there's any one thing that you can take away from this podcast, it's to keep an open mind in the month of April. Not uncommon at all to be on a very stellar, very strong pattern. You can call your shot. And for the next 3 or 4 days, you cannot generate a bite doing that. So again, not to say that it won't kind of materialize, but it's always changing this time of year. The weather conditions and water conditions are very rarely stable. And that's just going to lead to an unstable pattern or changing fish behavior.
I feel like that's something that, I've always struggled with, especially early on in my tournament career. And the more I'm around guys like you that are doing it at the very top level through the TV show, is how quickly you change. Most guys, they go out and, we're fishing for a BFL or, the local club derby or whatever. And we get, a day or two to practice the weekend before, and we absolutely smash them, catch them pre-spawning. And we go back, and the only places that you fish are the places that you caught them last week. Like, they were right here last week. Well, let's talk about what's happened, especially this time of year in the month of April. We've had a cold front plus 3 days of warming right after that. Like, they change by the minute.
Exactly. They probably changed 2 or 3 different times since the last time that you stopped there or caught them in that area. So, yeah, one thing that has really, really helped me, again, not just in tournament fishing, it has really obviously made me a lot more efficient in a limited amount of time during a tournament day. But even just for your weekend angler that cares nothing about tournaments, if you can go into it, and you have to kind of be careful with this, you don't want it to be a negative outlook by any means. So I don't want anyone to think that, but I go into a day of fishing, say I've had a couple, great days of fishing the last couple of days. Like, I wake up expecting them to not be doing what they were. And if they are, then we're good to go. Like, we know exactly where we're going to catch them. We run the pattern. But if you go into it with the mindset of like, they're probably not going to be there, let's check it. Let's make sure. We're not going to spend a tremendous amount of time, but let's see if we can get a clue and kind of lead us in the right direction. But I almost certainly end up having every day to go re-find them. But it's just having that mentality or anticipation that they're probably not going to be there. When they aren't, you're not so dead set on making them be there. And one thing that I learned with bass fishing,
that comes from fishing a whole lot of tournaments where you've caught them in practice and it not working that next day.
Yeah, exactly. It's just kind of it's not something that, I learned or got comfortable with overnight, but after a period of time, it kind of got to be really noticeable that when I fish the current conditions, meaning like in practice, I'm fishing for what's happening right now, the fishing was so much easier. I got bites. I generally, you catch a pretty good bag. You always hear the guy that wins practice never wins the tournament. It's because he's fishing for whatever the fish were doing, in practice. And once I kind of wrap my mind around, hey, I always have a good practice, and then my tournament is always about half as good, it's because you're now not on the front or leading edge of whatever these fish are doing. You're kind of fishing the tail end of them, and they've oftentimes already been fished for, or the any number of things could happen.
Any one of the million variables changed.
Exactly. But when you catch them the best, is when you pull into this pocket for the first time, whether it's the first time they've seen a bait or the first time they've seen yours, you're fishing in there with the most amount of confidence. You always tend to catch them better. That's just kind of once I understood that and kind of gained confidence, I would rather go fish new water. Like I honestly probably cost myself a position or two on championship day at Redcrest last week because I felt like I had kind of used up most of what I had. And I knew, every day I'd finish somewhere between 4th and 7th place. Now, one day I practiced for a good portion of that day. So that I might could have, ran the leaderboard up a little further, but I felt like going into championship day to win, I would have to find something new. And I spent my whole first period, running around fishing places I'd never even seen, hadn't been into.
Like didn't even poke your head in there in practice.
Negative. I had no idea. I looked the night before, at Google Earth, and I saw what I was looking for in those areas. Everything kind of the makeup of the area made sense and was along the same lines as what I'd been catching them on, but I had not yet put my boat in that pocket or area. So
yeah,
I
guys,
really ran.
I want our listeners to think about this for just a second and to really soak what you said in there, because that's what makes the best. And I'm saying Jake Lawrence is one of the best right now. That's what makes the best so good is you're fishing for $300,000, a major championship. And you started in a place you had never seen before. You didn't even poke your head in practice. You're like, looks right. Let's go.
Yeah. And again, it all comes back to, you think back to your best fishing days, your biggest numbers, your biggest weights. It's all days when you were just fishing them, the old Iaconelli cliche term, like fishing the moment. You're fishing for whatever the fish were doing that day. And in this scenario, because they were spawning, it wasn't necessarily that I was doing something different. That final day, I needed to find an area where a fresh batch of them had moved in and they had not been getting fished because they just simply weren't there. And I knew if I could find something like that, I would have an opportunity to win. I just felt like if I went back and kind of refished everything that I had, I was probably going to finish 4th to 7th. And to even take this a step further, the second qualifying day, I believe, I had a pretty good scope period. I had a really good second period fishing. And that third period, I just went practicing and looking again, trying to find this magical area that a bunch of smallers had pulled into. With 10 minutes left in the third period, I pulled into a brand new area, literally almost. And I can't even believe I admitted this, but like I knew I was 20 pounds, 15 pounds ahead. We got 10 minutes left. Like I almost turned around and started driving back to the ramp. What can I accomplish in 10 minutes? But I thought, you've never done that. You've never given up a minute early. We're not doing it now in Redcrest. So pulled into this little pocket, didn't look like much on the map. And it was, lo and behold, it was exactly what we were looking for. Like there was a long chute that didn't even show up on my mapping. It's all protected. You knew it was good spawning ground. I caught 3 in 10 minutes. Like never picked my raptors up. As soon as I got there, we caught 3 and I could see all the pennywort and primrose for what seemed like several hundred yards back there. And I thought, this is it. Like I'd catch one about every third cast, basically, and we ran out of time. And again, it's fine. I didn't need any more, but I thought, whoa, this is it. Like this is the area that we've been looking for. And it really, it got me through on that knockout round. Had I not found that area, I went back in there in the end of the second or beginning of the third period when I caught that last clutch fish. And I didn't actually catch it there, but I did catch like 6 or 8 really nice ones in that little stretch. It just, unfortunately, I got so far back in there, the stretch was good for about 200 yards, and then it turned into like aquarium water. Like you could have seen them 10 foot deep if it was, if it was that deep, and they just wouldn't bite. I know they were still in there. You'd see one swimming around every now and then, but you just couldn't trick them in that super clear water. So again, there were outside factors that kind of played and didn't work out. But had I not gone practicing all new areas that second qualifying day, I wouldn't have even qualified for the championship round. But to kind of get back to my point, I really kind of, and you'll do this from time to time. Like it's hindsight's 2020. I'm always going to lean and be happier with myself, knowing that I made what I felt like at the time was the right decision. It was more of a gamble, but let's go look for new ground. If we land on it, we're going to be a hero. If we don't, we're probably going to finish like 8th to 10th. And we had a great week. And I made the call that I felt like I needed to make. I was going to be happy with it either way. But it's going into that second period, I did not have a bite the entire first period. And I thought, boy, you better get somewhere that something lives. Like we're way down the list at this point. And so
Right.
I ran back to an area that I'd gotten a few bites in. I fished about half of that stretch, and it just wasn't feeling right. The water had come up 6 or 7 inches, totally changed the dynamic of that little spawning flat and kind of where they wanted to be. And I don't know, it's just instincts, past history, whatever you want to call it. Like I just got this inkling that, man, they're not seeing my swim bait. They're not able to find my swim jig. The water had gotten a little dirtier. I reached in my rod box and pulled out a chatterbait with a Yamamoto Swim Cinco on it from practice. Had not thrown a cast in the tournament, and my first cast, like haven't moved the boat since I've thrown my swimmer and swim jig all around fan casting. First cast to catch a 211, second cast to lose one, fifth cast to catch one. Like it was one of those moments, almost kind of like that, not quite, but almost like one of those Takahiri moments. Like that dude had been fishing through that whole day. Exactly. And he picked that little square bill up, and that was the deal. And he knew it from the very first cast. Yeah. It was like, when that happened, I was like, oh, my goodness, like I'm getting a bite every 3 to 5 casts. And, had I maybe not made the call that I did and run new water in that first period, and pick that chatterbait up quicker, again, that's all just fishing. But my point to this is it's a numbers game. That's not always going to work out, but to keep an open mind, even in the final day, when you've proven yourself to be among the best that week, it's still not good enough. You need to constantly look and find new things. Had I found something that had developed during the tournament, which means most likely nobody would have found it, we're all fishing the things that were happening in practice. That's where you can run away from these guys, any field that you're fishing against. So I encourage all, always keep an open mind, especially in the month of April, because it is always going to change. The only constant is that there's always going to be change in the month of April.
So here's a good question for you. Some Tennessee River guys you talk to, they never get off of the main river. If even in April, they're fishing islands and they're fishing, little gravel rounds and that kind of thing on the main river. Do you think, always been one of my opinion, that the biggest fish in the lake, I don't give a damn if you're on a herring lake or if you're on the Tennessee River, any one you want to pick, that the biggest fish in the lake live on the main river. It's where most of the bait fish is. So do you think most of these fish swim to a bay, or are the bigger fish out on the river?
So again, it's like any question you ask. I feel like I have to say this. So it could be a number of different things. What we have to do, what my goal is on any of these podcasts is when we're talking about bass behavior or patterns and seasonal things, is like we can only talk about the majority. Bass are no different than humans. There's always going to be outliers. And,
yeah, of course.
People that maybe have a little different train of thinking, and bass are no different. You'll find the oddballs, and with anything that I ever say about a bass, you can always find an exception. Somebody's seen something that contradicts that. So I can only speak about the majority, but it again, this is all going to depend on, the conditions. Like what we have going on right now with an extremely high lake, I feel like a lot of them are going to get off the main river. They may not go all the way to the back of a bay, that's a mile or two, from the main river. But there is no question, without a shadow of a doubt, if you can find the pattern or the groups of fish that are relating to the main river, they're almost always bigger. The population is bigger. There's more numbers there. They're going to replenish. My best area there on Guntersville, again, it was a spawning flat with both coontail, primrose and pad stems there, kind of depending on which section of the flat you were in. It was a main lake flat. It was somewhat protected, but it was not in a bay. And to me, that was the only place that every day I could spend one period in there and catch them. It was like they would reload. I do think that I caught one of the same spawners on the first day of qualifying, and on my knockout round, he was at least on the exact same bright spot.
Mm-hmm.
It was too deep to see the fish, but you could just see the bright spot. But I want to say it almost weighed exactly the same. I might have caught the same one, but I feel like the majority of those fish were replenishing. There was one little point of primrose that every day you could catch a scorball off of, and they were all different sizes. So I know those were different fish moving into that area, and that's pretty common on the Tennessee River. If you can find something, the more main lake it is, the more likelihood you have for it to reload and it to just generally hold out longer. Again, generally speaking, the biggest bass on that particular body of water is going to live more main lake related. So that is true. However, probably it's the 1 month, really the 1 month out of the year that maybe go into the first week or two of May, maybe, where you can catch big ones and win events and find big groups of fish in the bays. Like outside of April, and again, maybe a little bit of May,
Of course,
you almost never see me in a bay. Like it's a main lake deal. And, I'm willing to go a lot longer in between bites or finding groups because I know when I do, it's going to take me a lot further.
Well, we've talked quite a bit about largemouth, and that's basically what we've been talking about right here. Kentucky Lake, especially. Now, a lot of the rivers like this too. The tournament we're talking about here a lot was one on smallmouth up on the dam. Let's talk about the month of April and spawning smallmouth, especially as it regards to Kentucky Lake, Pickwick. Those. What are you looking for in April for spawning smallmouth? Because they're the dumbest fish in the whole lake.
That is one of the most fun bass to fish for. Really, it's almost pitiful. I'm almost it's hard to get super excited about. You do get excited about catching one, but it's almost like, man, that was easy. They really are the most territorial fish when they're in that kind of spawn window. So let's look there at Blood River, kind of the mouth of Blood River. That's a great place to look. There's always a tremendous amount of fish that kind of, live out there on these, whether it's bars or flats or, the smallmouth. And I'll be the first to admit, I'm still learning about these spawning smallmouth. They seem to do things, at least here on Kentucky Lake, differently depending on water and weather conditions. Like I know I haven't been on Kentucky Lake and it's been a while, but I guarantee you, before this water came up, there were a ton of spawning smallmouth out there on these main lake high spots, shoals, bars, flats, a multitude of different things.
How deep are you how deep are you starting to look for them?
So the general kind of where I like to start is in about 6 feet, but I have caught them all the way out to 12. You're not going to find as many out there, but usually the one that is above average. I don't want to say necessarily big, but he's generally not a 3-pounder. But you're looking for areas that aren't in the direct flow of current. So for instance, we see, well, here I'm pointing at it like everybody else is going to see that. But if you look just at the north end of that, where the blue is there, you'll see that little ditch that comes in. Correct. And you'll see that little high spot right where your cursor is. So whether it be pre-spawn, post-spawn, in the fall, outside of the spawn, they're generally going to live on the southern end of that bar or that flat. That's where the current is going to hit it the hardest. The current's going to funnel in and out. It will be
more down here somewhere.
Correct. But on the spawn, I'm really relating more to the way up on top of these flats, on the back sides of them, the creek channel side of this thing, somewhere that they can get somewhat out of the current. Look, it's all in the current out here. I mean, there's going to be some current flow anywhere that you get, but it's important that only in the spawn window, they all want to get, out of the current. Again, any other time of the year, it's the total opposite. They're going to get in an area where, the creek channel turns, there's a point, something or anything that is directly being hit by current is where they're going to live. But this, it makes it real easy. That's exactly where your cursor is. I have weighed multiple fish. Probably shouldn't say this. I'm going to make somebody that likes fishing that mad, but I've caught multiple spawning smallmouth right where your cursor is in the last two Toyotas that I've won. So like, that's a prime example of a spawning flat. It's close enough to the bank there. It's not in direct flow of the current, but there is still going to be some current flow there. But they generally want to get up on top of these flats and really, I'm kind of giving a little gem out here, and some people have figured it out, but if you can find one that is not on anything, so if you can find one just out in the flat spawning that's made a bed, that bed will replenish the entire spawning window. Like, you could haul that fish, and I hate to do this, but you could haul that fish 30 miles back to a marina, and tomorrow or the next day there'll be another one sitting on it. So it's like a reoccurring place that it's a waypoint that I'm going to hit quite frequently for about a 2-week window, because they will replenish.
As opposed to finding them on a piece of cover, a little piece of brush.
Yeah,
or
for one, I don't really understand
like
that. I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's easier for them to find that bed. And that was something that, look, I'll be the first to admit, I'm still learning each spring. I'm learning more and more about their behavior. And again, with each spring, I get more, whether it be inconsistencies or consistencies throughout the last couple springs, that with time you can kind of start compiling, and you can put more weight on a theory or a hypothesis the more that you've seen it either happen or not happen. So still certainly learning, but the ones that are around the cover seem to take longer to replenish, and they don't. It's not that it's not big ones, but you'll catch a lot more numbers, but it's not always the ones that you're looking for. They're easy to find, but
how are you finding those fish out there? Like, obviously, if the fish is on a stump, you're looking at him with your scope, and that fish is sitting around a stump. Sometimes you can see some fry there if he's garden fry, or maybe not. You may see him beside it, may see him on top of it, but that fish you can pretty much see, is around that stump, especially when you're talking about spawning smallmouth. How are you finding the ones that you're just talking about there, which are not on any cover?
Yeah, so I'm really, this is the one time of the year, the one scenario where I'm really utilizing my perspective. I run 2 transducers on my boat. I'm sure most everyone has seen that. However, they may not know, outside of the spawn and some grass situation, submerged grass, I don't ever even have that perspective transducer turned on. Like, it is literally there for about a 6-week window out of the year. Now that I travel, it obviously, like, I found a really big one on perspective at Harris Chain that I've wasted about half my scope period on, never did catch. But, it does extend my window there, but very little do I use my perspective transducer outside of the spawn. And
talk about those settings a little bit. How far out are you looking is the main thing? And then the actual transducer mount that you're using, because I feel like it's pretty important.
Correct. So I use a fish obsessed mount. It gives me a lot of options as far as, kind of where I want to angle this transducer based on how deep I am. Something that a lot of people don't realize with forward facing or whether it be Garmin or Lowrance, Garmin has a 21 degree cone. Lowrance is an 18 degree cone. So it's even narrower. You're only getting, like, in a vertical, or let's call it a true forward facing transducer, like, you might only be seeing a little sliver, this wide as you pan it across there. What's no different when I turn that transducer sideways in perspective. I'm only seeing, let's call it, like, 3 to 6 feet. Well, if that fish is in 9, I'm not going to see him. If he's in 2, I'm not going to see him real good. So it's important to have a mount, a transducer mount that will allow you adjustment there to be able to fix it. I was even utilizing perspective last year for my invitational win on Eufaula. So that was a postponed event. Those fish were offshore, very similar to like what they do here on the TVA. However, the bottom there is a lot more clay and a lot less shell and rock. And so you could see those fish very, very well on perspective. However, I'm sure somebody's going to smirk and kind of snicker and they've got one up on me. I've not really been able to utilize perspective as much on the TVA as far as these offshore schools. It's just the bottom is too hard. Everything is too hot. I've not found a way to separate the fish when I take away enough, whether it be gain or my noise reject. When I do things to dim down the bottom, I'm also taking away that information that would show you the fish. And so I've not really found a happy median there. But again, getting back to these spawners, it is absolutely something that I always have on the boat and will always have turned on. Even when I'm up flipping bushes shallow, like here for the next couple of days, I would have perspective turned on, and I guarantee you at some point throughout the day, I would see one on a bed out there in the middle of that flat that you would never even throw to, had you not had it. But I really like to, so on my forward range, I'm always looking at 100 feet. With all electronics, marine electronics, whether it be side imaging, forward, true forward, or perspective, I want consistency. I don't like a lot of auto tune. When something looks a certain way, I want it to always look that way. So you're basically training your eyes to look for certain things. And I'm also looking for certain things that I know aren't what I'm looking for, if that makes sense. Like Asian carp here silver carp here on Kentucky Lake and much of the Tennessee River, unfortunately. Like I know in a millisecond that's what that is. Therefore, I can pan off and look somewhere else. I'm not having to hone in on him and really stare and watch and see how
do you know
he
that?
reacts.
How do you know that?
So on forward facing, any scaleless fish is going to show up very grainy. Meaning you're going to be able to see, depending on the color scheme that you use, it's almost always going to be a black background. You're going to be able to see, and not just carp, but catfish, drum, anything that doesn't have scales, you're going to see kind of the black come through the middle of the fish. It's going to be real grainy looking. Whereas a scaled fish, the scale is hard, it's going to generate a much harder, more solid return. So if you pan it across there and see a dot and you can't see light through it, it is a solid, looks like a light bulb. Could be a bass, could be, a multitude of different things, but that's a predator fish. Like it's a scaled fish of some sort. Again, with the carp, you can also, every fish species has its own behavior or I don't want to call it posture, but the way that it moves, the way that it swims, the way that it acts based on its surroundings. And carp are very lazy. Their tail wag is very slow. They don't get in a hurry. Even when they're spooked, they're not overly excited. It's not a real quick tail movement to it. And again, most of our silver carp are not juvenile. They're call it 5 to 12 pounds. So it's pretty obvious. There is no question, no doubt in my mind. I have seen a 10-pounder and just kept right on looking somewhere else because I thought it would be a carp. There's so many here, and when you see an object that big, you just kind of chalk it up to be a carp. And I know I've thrown or not thrown rather by a great big one that I should have. On my forward facing, I like to run it at 100 feet. And what I have found with my perspective is if I'll tone that back to call it 70 or 80 feet, the interference is not as severe. So I run 236s. I don't, 34. I don't like the 64? I don't like the saltwater transducer. So I run the 2 freshwaters. The 32s were pretty good, but I really like running both of the same transducers for a couple different reasons. With me on tour, oftentimes on the road, when we've got one period to make our scope stuff happen, I need to have a backup there. Really, I use my perspective is if something was to go crazy, if I pinch my wire, if I tore a network cable up, if whatever may happen, I've got a backup that's already existing. It's ready to go. It's going to take me about 30 seconds to get all that swapped over to the way that I need to use it. So I use it that way as well. And that's also another feature of the Fish Obsessed. It's very, very easy to twist that thing around and get it in the posture that it needs to be.
0
Running my
degrees really
forward at
important.
100 and my
Right.
perspective at 70, there is still some interference there, but it does significantly reduce it based on if you ran both of them at 100 feet.
The 0 degree is pretty important on both.
It is. It is. You're absolutely right. So, a standard like perspective or, various other mounts, they have an 8-degree offset. So try to get this right. So this is going to be what is a 0 degree. It is straight vertical. Your 8-degree offsets, you're going to have it tilted like this. And the reason I'm trying to explain this is exactly how your beam is going to be. Remember, it's only a little bitty sliver. A Garmin 21 degrees, active target 2 is 18. So when your offset is, or your beam is offset, you're going to fall into the cone. And if it's deep enough, you're going to eventually fall back out of it. So you can see how I did that with the screen. Like I don't see my bait. I start to see my bait. Now the bait's brighter and brighter and brighter. The brightest, I'm right in the center of the return. And then you very quickly will fade out of it and completely lose your bait. So I will say the 0 degree is the deeper that you fish, the more important the 0 degree is. Can oftentimes get away with, you're fishing less than 25 feet of water. You can get away with an offset, a 6 to 8 degree offset, but certainly to be precise and to never lose your bait, regardless of the depth that it's in, that 0 degree is very important.
Yeah, Transducer Shield and Saver, who's owned by Bob's Machine Shop, just came out with a good one too. Changes really easy, really stout.
Awesome.
And I think it's got 5 degrees of offset when you're on perspective, depending on exactly which way you need
Correct.
to go.
I'll have to check that one out. I tell you, it is, again, we're all so good, at this level. It's a Bass Pro Tour, and I'm always looking for an edge. Back years ago, it was, I don't want to say pretty easy. I don't want to take away from what they did. But if you spend an innate amount of time, a very, very long time perfecting a technique or a pattern, you really had an advantage when a fishery set up to utilize that pattern because you just knew so much more about it, the intricate little details, the do's and don'ts based on water and weather conditions. And like you were always 2 or 3, 4, 10 steps ahead of your competitors. Now, with podcasts much like this, YouTube videos, everything is at everyone's fingertips. And you're crazy if you don't think even these guys watch that stuff. So I'm always looking for the extra little advantage. And I bet I spent, and I hope my wife doesn't rewatch this and hear this, I bet I spent $1,500 last year from Performance Electronics on just mounts for my transducers alone. Just again, I always want to make sure that I've got the very best. And if I can catch one more fish each tournament day, that adds up a tremendous amount of points at the end of the year. And again, not everyone is super, high focused on that. And you don't have to be. That's not at all what I mean by that. But the same things that make me more efficient and get me one extra bite are also going to help make things easier for a beginner or, a weekend angler that's just not as, adapt to the feel of it and kind of what you're seeing. So it helps all the way around, regardless of kind of where you are in the fishing stage.
Well, let's talk about some rods, reels, baits, combos that you're going to have anytime you're fishing a Tennessee River Lake in the month of April. Let's start if you're targeting a largemouth, and then let's add a few in if you're targeting smallmouth, because I'm sure they're going to be a little bit different.
Absolutely. Very, very much so. So I've got to have a trap in the month of April. It's something that I can cover a ton of water with. I'll be honest, it's hard for me to pick one trap just because it's all based like one little sneaky thing. I'll give everybody another little gem here that I probably shouldn't, but somebody's going to beat me on this. they're going to give me a hard time for it, but that's all right. I'm glad I could do it. Is a Bill Lewis 1/4 ounce trap. So that is one of the most underutilized, overlooked baits. And the reason, and I'll even throw this a lot in March, I actually caught a ton of my fish at Conroe on it. But what I'm able to do with that little 1/4 ounce Bill Lewis is I can fish it slow, like slower than you normally could a trap, and in extremely shallow water. So it's, as we all know, both March and April, we always have these little warming trends, and it's very, very common for these fish to get in really, really shallow water. Now, again, your boat might be sitting in 10 or 15 even, but the fish
is in 8 inches.
Up there.
Yeah.
8 inches, right. And a 1/2 ounce, call it a hammer trap. It's a great trap out there in like 2 to 6, but you get it up there in 0 to call it 2 feet. It's almost just like running on its side and kicking over. And it's just, it doesn't
You
act
can't
like
wind it fast enough to not get hung.
To not get it hung and it to act all weird and lay over on its side. So I throw a 1/4 ounce trap a ton early in the spring, anytime that those fish are, again, usually it's a warming trend and those fish are really, really shallow, but it's something that I can fish both fast, but most importantly, that time of year, it's usually kind of a slow crawling it around, dragging it, kind of worming it through there. So I've got to have a 1/4 ounce. However, again, at the very same day, I may catch them on a 1/2 ounce or a 5/8 hammer trap. Like that's something that I always have in the boat, and just kind of based on the area and the conditions would dictate that. I've got to have a jerk bait. That's always something in April, which doesn't get talked about a tremendous amount. It has more so with forward facing now. It used to be just a cold water bait and something that, we would catch over deep water or fish over deep water and catch those suspended fish. We very quickly found that a suspending jerk bait will catch them anywhere, any time of the year. There are days when, slick, calm conditions, like it's harder to get them to bite it, but they're always going to be intrigued and curious by that. It's something that I can cover a lot of water. However, when I get in a zone, or maybe it's, over the top of a lay down, I can slow that bait down. And really, I can dictate the speed at which I fish that based on what they're telling me and kind of their mood. So I always have a jerk bait tied on.
You a Megabass 110 guy, or what's your favorite bait?
I throw a multitude of baits. However, in the springtime, like particularly April when I'm fishing really shallow, I like that scope stick. They make a floating one, which I do add a little bit of weight to so that it's not like a cork, just as soon as you quit jerking, it floats up naturally or straight out of the pack. It is going to float up very, very aggressively. I'll add some suspend strips or add lead wire around the hooks, just kind of depending on what materials I have available. But I'll get that bait to kind of a slow float. And what it allows me to do is fish a jerk bait a lot shallower than what you would normally do. And if I feel it hit the bottom as I'm jerking it along, you can just kind of feed some slack back to it. Kind of got to be patient, but you give it 5 or 8, 10 seconds and it'll float itself far enough off the bottom. You can keep working it. But again, the biggest thing,
that's a Bill Lewis scope stick.
That is the Bill Lewis scope stick. Correct. It's also got so there are times when I want a jerk bait to be very aggressive. And what I mean is, like, when I snap that jerk bait, it flies way over left and right. The bait will shimmy as it's doing that. And there are times when I want the bait to be very dead. And again, I'm moving it. I'm keeping the bait working and twitching, but it's not moving laterally, left and right a foot or 2 feet. Again, all depends on the kind of the mood of the fish. Generally speaking, the more lethargic the fish are, the more I like that scope stick. It's still got a ton of action, but it's just not as aggressive as say a Megabass or, a Stunner. There's, a multitude of different jerk baits that have all kind of catered towards the overly aggressive. The bait is moving in maximum different directions at the maximum pace that you can make, physically make that jerk bait move. And with Bill Lewis, they wanted to kind of go a different direction here. I don't know whether it was by design or, if it kind of just came out that way, but it is a jerk bait that I always have in the boat. And I've always, I'm with forward facing, regardless of what technique or pattern, I'm always paying attention to the fish. You always hear, deer hunters, like big successful deer hunters, very conscious about watching what that big mature buck is doing and like his general behaviors. And I kind of correlate that to a bass in a much shorter, time span on forward, but I can read and tell you a lot about a fish in 5 seconds that I see him and kind of his moods and what he's doing, how he's reacting. I will oftentimes in cold water throw a mega bass, let's say a Vision 110 +1. And when I hit that bait, he'll scoot up and then kind of back up. And you hit it again, he'll scoot up, kind of back up. Sometimes he'll even veer off.
And that's because that bait is working a foot both ways. Like it
both ways,
really, really erratic.
And it's very erratic, and it's almost something that, that bass is not totally comfortable with. Otherwise, he wouldn't do that kind of back up and re-investigate this whole thing. And that is exactly like I won't let more than 2 or 3 fish show me that before I make that change to a scope stick. And again, it's usually more of as a general rule of thumb, the colder the water temperature is, the more that I want that bait to kind of act sluggish and be a little slower. The warmer the water temperatures, the more that I want it to kind of be aggressive. The other thing is in dirtier water, I don't like that bait to be overly aggressive. Like really clear water, I like a little more aggressive. I like it to move. I don't want that fish to see my bait very good at all because he can see it. It's gen clear. Oftentimes, take a Lake Murray, for instance, or a Hartwell. Like they can see, I feel like, as good as I can see you on the screen right now. So I don't, like if you would move around and do all this, like you can't see near as good as if I'm just sitting still here. So that's a general rule of thumb. Again, it's so important to let each day kind of dictate and the mood of the fish really tell you which direction you need to go there. So a jerkbait, a trap, usually in April, going to have a buzz bait of some sort. That's something that, again, I'm all kind of catering to the warming trends because that's kind of what's happening right now and usually does in April. But again, both the jerkbait and the trap, it's a reason that I picked those first. They'll bite that, whether it's a warming trend or a cool spell, may dictate which bait I throw, which trap or which jerkbait I throw. But both of those are always going to be on my deck. And obviously you can't talk about April fishing without having some sort of, like a Senko style bait, whether it be a Slinko, a standard 5 or 6 inch Senko. You've got to have some sort of wacky rigged or even Texas rigged on a lightweight, some sort of straight tail kind of do nothing worm to drag around in these areas. Sometimes they get, like, to me, there is a point in time in the spawn window where they're not quite spawning yet. Like most of the time, I feel like the males are probably making the bed, but they're not actively spawning, but they're past that pre-spawn feed up and kind of eat anything that's around. But you've got to slow down and drag around these fish to trigger them, to get them to bite. And that's why I'm always going to have I really prefer, just because I'm kind of a speed freak, like I can't sit still very long, I like a 6 inch Senko if I can get them to bite that bigger profile. That bait is a little bit heavier and I can cover a little more water, meaning like it's going to get to the bottom faster. I'm not good with sitting there watching squirrels and doing much of anything. I need to be winding, shaking. I need to be doing something. So I like that 6 inch, something new that's just come out that I, to be completely honest, have not been in the right kind of situation to throw it yet, but we've just come out from Yamamoto with a fat Senko, both a 5 and a 6. Really excited to experiment and throw that, probably have it tied on there at Chickamauga. Just, again, for me, it's a speed thing, efficiency. Usually when you get a slow moving bait around a bass, like he's going to come look at it. He's going to, hope he bites it. A higher percentage of them will bite it if you can kind of keep it in their window. But to me, what kills me with a weightless Senko is just that, I mean, sometimes it's only a couple seconds, but a couple seconds adds up throughout a tournament day of like that dead zone where I know a bass is not living in the top 3 feet of the water column. So I've got to like hurry up and get my bait down 3 to 5 feet to get it kind of in his zone.
But they don't act the same if they're not waiting.
Weird, but like seconds add up to me, and it's something that's really important. I need to get my bait there quickly and efficiently.
And I don't think they act the same when you put a weight on them, like a wacky weight,
100%
shake or whatever.
Correct.
I mean, I'm not going to say you're not going to catch any on it by any means. I know that's a deal.
Absolutely.
But now a weightless wacky worm, catches a lot more bass to me than any time I've ever put a weight on.
It absolutely does. It's just got to get to wherever they are. And sometimes I feel like I'm reeling it away from it before it ever even actually sunk down there to where the fishy is. Like, and that's something on me. Like Mark Davis, it blows my mind. I love that dude to death. Super cool guy. Obviously looked up to him my entire life. Now, humbling enough, I'm like fishing against him and competing with him. And to watch him practice as I'm kind of running around 9,000 miles an hour. I've already had to fill my boat up twice today for, first day of practice. He's literally fished 2 points and he's dragging something around. And it's like the dude catches them everywhere he goes. He fishes so slow. I think the fish swim to him. Like, he doesn't troll to the bass. They swim to him, but he makes it work. And it's unbelievable how he comes across them. I think his history, his experience, he's obviously long in the tooth when it comes to traveling around and finding new bodies of water, breaking down new lakes. But he can cover probably the least amount of water of any competitor and still beat us and catch them. So it's one of those things. Once you get your bait down there, they'll bite it. But boy, I've got to wind. I'm not much of a dragger at all.
Well, we're running out of time here a little bit. Give me a couple of more baits that you're going to have, and then let's talk about 2 or 3 different smallmouth baits real quick.
Yeah. So on the smallmouth side, again, on the largemouth side, kind of along the same lines. Like I will usually have some sort of swim bait, like a B5, a B6, mag draft style, a line through swimmer. The reason that you see these line through swimmers play for this like little bitty window depends on where you are located, but usually from like March to end of April is the window when the fish are the closest to the surface up on the bank. And again, a lot of that has to do with a warming trend. The top couple feet of the water column is the warmest, and that's where they'll get. And it's not that a bass won't bite one of these line throughs the rest of the year. It's just kind of going back to my wacky rig. It's hard to let it sink long enough to get it down there. Usually as soon as you start winding it, it's rising back up to the surface. But that is always something. A line through 5 to 6 inch swimmer is always what I'm going to have tied on. I tend to, on smallmouth or spotted bass fisheries, I'll lean more towards a 4.5, 5 inch bait. If it's straight largemouth, I'll generally start with a 6, but again, I'll just kind of let them dictate. Not that a smallmouth or a spot won't bite that 6 inch, but you do oftentimes still catch, I feel like, the same largemouth you would have caught on the 6 on that 5 inch, but you're adding in a couple extra bites of smallmouth here on Kentucky Lake, or we get to Hartwell or a Cart, wherever it's spotted bass, Smith Lake. I'll generally downsize a little bit to accommodate that. But that's always something that you can cover. Again, you'll notice kind of my trend. I'm covering a ton of water in April. I'm covering a lot of water any time of the year, but April, it's important to at least, even if I know I'm in that window of the spawn, like we were talking, where you kind of got to drag for them, I'll oftentimes fish moving baits and cover water until I get a bite or two. And once I get a bite or two, then I'm going to put my raptors down and I'm going to drag around in that area and see if I can pick off a few more. But to me, I cannot drag around and try to find these fish. I know a lot of guys can, and you're super successful with it, but that's just kind of my way of finding them. And then we're going to slow down and kind of milk the area. But on the smallmouth side of things, it's really pretty simple. I've got the same jerk bait. I've got a jig-headed minnow, a multitude of different minnows, kind of depends on the conditions, the water clarity. However, I am really excited. I'm just now kind of allowed to start talking about it, but I've got one that I've been working on with Yamamoto for not quite a year, probably like 9 months or so. And we've got like 2 of the 4 sizes dead on, and we're waiting to get them all, the entire lineup, ready to rock and me happy with before we release. But I was told we're pretty confident that will happen at ICAST. So I'm going to have some sort of, call it a 4 to 6 inch jig-headed minnow rigged up, just again, depending on the dirtier the water, the bigger the minnow I'll go, the more presence it has, the easier they can find it.
And Tennessee River, it's known for big baits. They eat gizzards.
Exactly.
A 6 inch minnow is not a big minnow there.
That's not a big minnow. Like, it's amazing how many smallmouth and largemouth both cough up drum particularly on Kentucky Lake. Like I've seen it more on Kentucky than I have the rest of the Tennessee River. However, I don't know that there is a lake, maybe besides Nickajack, because I haven't fished there a lot, that I haven't seen one spit up a drum. And like, I'm not talking about, a little bitty, like little drum. I mean, it's not 2 pounds, but it's a big old drum. For all things considered, what you would expect a smallmouth to eat. So like, we think these are big giant baits, but most of our bass tackle is really on the small side of what they feed on, like, length and kind of presence to what they feed on, at least here on the Tennessee River. So I wasn't trying to follow that up. We'll move on very quickly away from that. So I had a reason. But jig-headed minnow, a shaky head is a big player. It's kind of about the only time of the year that I throw a shaky head, like consistently, always have one tied on. I've always got them in the boat. Love that little owner center pin screw lock. Generally an 1/8 ounce is kind of your standard. I'll go to 3/16 if the wind's blowing or the current's running, but that shaky head. So I used to throw what we call a stupid tube a lot, and I still do. I still always have them in the boat when these smallmouth are spawning. What will have to happen oftentimes is you can call that fish up with a minnow or a jerk bait. A lot of them are going to bite, but there is a percentage, for whatever reason, he's in a different stage of the spawn, that they just don't want to come up and eat. Like, he'll come up to show interest to the bait, but he won't actually bite. First thing that hits the bottom in the bed, he's going to eat it almost every time. And
so that's actually with a tube head and a small tube?
Correct. It's like the Texas rig, kind of internally weighted tube head. A big deal up in Ohio, Indiana area. Great way to generate a ton of bites. And the reason I like the stupid tube is for these smallmouths, it's real erratic. Like when that thing falls, it's kind of got a spiral. When you hop it up, it just kind of rips around. Not going to go in any one direction the same way twice. My problem with it, and the reason that I throw the shaky head now before I get to that, is just the hookup ratio. A lot of times they're, again, not biting this in a feeding mode. They just kind of instinctually want to get it away and defend their bed. And a shaky head has a much higher hookup percentage or catch ratio than that tube. So I will always have that in the boat, but it's not something. I think the second Toyota, it was the second Toyota, I caught them all on a jig head minnow and a stupid tube. The third one, literally about halfway through the tournament, I was like, man, why am I losing like 15% of these? I'm pretty sure they bite whatever hits the bottom. And I tied on a shaky head, and I've never gone back.
So you go to a shaky head versus a Ned rig?
Versus a Ned. You could throw a Ned. A shaky head and a Ned in this situation, I think, are kind of one and the same. You're doing the same thing with it. I like a shaky head because some of these fish do spawn next to cover, and that Ned will typically get hung up a little more. Again, if you Texas rigged a Ned, is that really a shaky head or is that a Ned? Yeah, I mean, it's all kind of one and the same once you do that. So just a lighter 8 to 3/16 ounce jig head with some sort of worm, straight tail worm on it. That Sensei worm and the Nico Rama have kind of been my go-to, depending on whether I want a small profile or a big profile. The Sensei will float. So generally, one thing that I have found is if the bottom is, and you don't see this as much on the TVA, but you do in other fisheries, if the bottom is kind of mucky, like it's hard enough for them to spawn, and doesn't matter if we're just talking spawn, this is any time of the year, any stage. But if the bottom is a little softer, a little more mucky, it's got a lot of decaying vegetation on it, I always want to throw a floating worm, like that Sensei worm. You can cut I believe it's the Itchy down or the Oki down. It's a thicker, longer, straight tail, but it's got that mega floater formula in it, and that bait will stand straight up. The reason that I feel like that's important is, whether we think it or not, the vast majority of all of our soft plastics lay dead flat on the bottom. Even when you hop it up, like that tail may stand up for just a second, but if you throw it in your sink or a pool, every time it lays flush on the bottom. And I feel like a percentage of those fish are so fired up, they'll bite your bait anyway, but a large percentage of them I watch on forward facing, they'll follow your bait really aggressively, and when it gets right to the bottom, they just kind of back up, level back out. they're not super keen on going in there and sucking all that silt up to get to your bait. So a floating bait, I can keep at least a portion of that bait kind of out of the silt. And a lot of times they'll suck kind of that end up and will eventually get your hook. You let them swim off with it. So that's something that's important. However, again, here on the TBA, most of it's pretty hard bottom. You can get away with a Nicarama or Sensei either way, but some sort of shaky head is always going to be something. It's kind of my fallback. Like when I can't get them to bite a jerkbait and that jig head minnow, I'm going to throw that shaky head in there. And usually if that fish is catchable, he'll bite that shaky head. And the hookup ratio is, your catch percentage or ratio is very good when it, bite to catch versus that stupid tube. I have seen at times when, I could say this about any bait, any technique, I've done it long enough now. There's always going to be exceptions, but I have seen it where they wouldn't bite shaky head and I could snap that tube up in front of them and get them to eat it. But it's like of that 20% of them, you're going to lose. And so I'm just trying to alleviate that. But it's really pretty simple. Like that's kind of my three baits. I'll mess around with a big glide bait every now and then. If a fish is not in like if you won't pay attention to my baits, a lot of times you can throw a glide over them, a big glide, the bigger the better. And all you're doing is just making them mad. Like they're not going to, most of the time they won't ever even touch your glide bait, but they can't ignore a 7, 8, 10 inch fish of some sort anywhere around his bed. Like he's got to pay attention to it. And so I'll throw that through there a few times and get them mad, get them charging it, and then throw your shaky head back in there. And a lot of times you've like pissed them off enough to make him bite.
Well, dude, I think we've talked a ton about the different baits and areas and that kind of thing. And again, I love talking to you. Just me learning. It's a lot of fun to get to talk to one of the best in the world going right now. Real quick before we get off here.
Yeah.
You caught a fish in Redcrest that might be one of the most talked about fish anywhere.
Which one? There's two potential moments here.
Not the one with 3 minutes to go. Let's talk really quickly about this one fish at Redcrest that you're going to be famous for.
Yeah. I tell you, I drink a lot of water and a lot of Diet Coke. And so I have to use the restroom quite frequently throughout the tournament day, to the point that like I've done it so much now, spent so many hours in the boat. Like I don't stop fishing anymore. And it's inevitable. Like I've got a friend of mine that says, I swear, like and I shouldn't say this publicly on a podcast, but like it makes one bite your bait. Cause I could fish for 3 hours and not catch one. And I have to use the restroom. If I make another cast, it's going to happen. I'm going to get a bite. So yeah, we made a run up to a pretty good run, 20 miles or so, and it was rough. One of those fronts were blowing through. It was really, really windy, and boy, it beat the literal piss out of me. So when I got there, I shut down in this area, and I real quickly I threw the Raptors down, grabbed my rod, and I had honestly, I did have like 3 or 4 minutes left in that period. And I thought, well, I'm going to get this restroom break out of the way, and then I'm going to make a cast before it lines out. And so I got my business going, and I thought, well, you big dummy, you got plenty of time. You can whiz one out there and see if it bites, And I make a bomb cast, wind it about 3 times. And nobody said that I'm on live. Like, let's get that out there. Sometimes they tell you and they'll warn you, and other times you're having a conversation with you and whoever else is in the boat. You have no idea the whole world is listening. So I learned that the hard way at Conroe and won't ever make that mistake again. But long story short, I make a cast, got my situation going here, and we have got a bass on live TV in front of everyone, my grandparents, my wife, my kids, and we've got our junk out. Like this is a bad situation here, and I don't know what to do. Like this fish is mission critical to get in the boat, but at the same time, like I can't mess this up. We can't be bad about this. So yeah, it was kind of a mad dash there for a few minutes trying to figure out what to do, and I'm hollering on live, that I got my pecker out, and it was just It was definitely like out of all videos that I've ever been a part of, we have not posted it yet, or at least to my knowledge, my videographer Eli has not posted it. However, I can guarantee you, I'm calling it right now, that's going to be the most viewed video that I've ever released. Little short there. It's quite funny, super memorable, you know, just kind of a part of this entire Redcrest. Like, it'll be something that I take away. I can't tell you how many texts I still have and haven't had a chance to respond to relating to that moment. So I know a lot of people got to see that. It was a little bit embarrassing, but at the same time, it's just kind of part of my world. Something like that's bound to happen to me. But it's like, of all the casts, like, how many casts in just that tournament day did I make when I was not using the bathroom? Like, why this one cast? So it's always funny. It's usually an adventure of some kind when you can jump in the boat with me, I can assure you.
Well, we're going to do that here pretty soon. Get you on a TV show before long, dude. I really appreciate you being on. The crazy thing is, we've already filmed this podcast once, and something happened in the stream and lost it all. So, I want to thank you again for taking your time twice to come on here. We'll
Absolutely.
definitely have you back on again. You're one of the best guys going right now. It's always great to get inside your mind, and just we'll leave our peckers inside our britches for the duration of the podcast.
Please.
And we will catch you next time right here on Take It to the Bank.
Yeah, you can take it to the bank. Hold the line, hey, you know we on the way all the time. Yeah, we